I didn't notice that visiting my friend's house became part of my week. At first, it was just convenience. He lived 10 minutes away, his Wi-Fi was better than mine, and his coffee machine actually worked. We'd sit around pretending to work while some old playlist drifted through the house. Most afternoons looked exactly the same: shoes by the front door, a half-read newspaper on the kitchen counter, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. His mom was almost always there. Not hovering, not trying to join our conversations, just existing in the background, moving through the kitchen with the kind of rhythm that comes from doing the same things for years. She'd rinse a mug, water the little herbs by the window, fold a dish towel into perfect squares without looking down. The first time she remembered how I took my coffee, I assumed it was luck. "No sugar," she said, sliding the mug toward me. I looked up. "You remembered." A tiny shrug. "You always make the same face when someone offers you sugar." I laughed. "I do. MHM. That was all. It should have stayed all." After that, little things started happening that were too small to mention. She'd ask whether work had been busy before I could complain about it. She'd leave an extra clean mug beside the coffee machine if she knew I was coming over. Sometimes she'd ask my friend a question, but her eyes would flick toward me for just a second, checking whether I was listening. Nothing about it felt inappropriate. Just noticed. Funny how rare that can feel. I lived alone in a small apartment where most evenings disappeared without leaving much behind. I'd unlock my phone, type half a message to someone I hadn't spoken to in months, then erase it before sending anything. Every night. Different words. Same silence. Some habits don't look lonely until someone interrupts them. One rainy Tuesday, my friend got called into work halfway through the afternoon. "You can stay if you want," he said, grabbing his keys. "Mom doesn't mind." He left before I answered. The house became strangely quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just quieter than I expected. She was at the kitchen table sorting grocery receipts into neat little piles. "I'll get out of your way," I said. "You don't have to." I nodded anyway. Neither of us moved. The clock over the stove ticked louder than it probably should have. She folded one receipt in half. Then another. "You always look like you're about to apologize," she said. "For what?" "I don't know." I smiled without meaning to. "I guess I like being prepared." That earned the smallest laugh. Not loud. Not polite. Real. For some reason, I kept looking at her hands as she straightened the stack of papers. Calm hands, careful hands, like someone who believed even ordinary things deserved a little attention. "You think too much," she said softly. "I've been told." I believe it. The rain tapped against the kitchen window. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. It was the first quiet I'd been in for a long time that didn't ask anything from me. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the front door. "Drive safely." "I will." I reached for the handle. "Hey." I turned back. "You left your notebook last week." "I did." She disappeared for a moment and came back holding the worn notebook I'd been looking for without realizing it. "I didn't read it," she said almost too quickly. "I know." Our eyes met for a second longer than either of us seemed prepared for. I thanked her, tucked the notebook under my arm, and drove home through the rain. That night, after staring at the blank screen of my phone for almost an hour, a message appeared. It wasn't from my friend. It was from his mom. "I hope you don't mind that I found something inside your notebook." Then, before I could decide whether to reply, another message arrived. "I think we should talk." I stared at her message longer than I should have. "I think we should talk." My first thought wasn't panic. It was wondering what she'd found. I opened the notebook as if the answer might still be inside. Most of it was filled with ordinary things: shopping lists, work deadlines, random thoughts I'd written instead of sending messages to people who had drifted out of my life. Then I remembered. Near the back was a page I'd written after another sleepless night. Just one sentence. "I miss having a place that feels like someone expects me to come home." I closed the notebook. Maybe she'd seen it. Maybe she hadn't. Either way, I couldn't ignore the message. The next afternoon, I stopped by the house. My friend wasn't home. He'd texted to say he was running errands and told me to let myself in. She was in the kitchen, pouring hot water into a teapot. "You came," she said. "You sounded serious." She looked down at the steam rising between us. "I found that page by accident. It slipped out when I picked up your notebook." For a second, neither of us spoke. "I'm sorry," she added. "You don't have to apologize." I still felt like I should. She poured tea into 2 mugs and pushed one toward me. The familiar gesture should have made everything feel normal. Instead, it made the silence heavier. "I wasn't trying to make anyone feel sorry for me," I said. "I know. It was just one of those nights." She wrapped both hands around her mug before answering. "I've had those." I looked up. She rarely spoke about herself. "My husband used to leave little notes around the house," she said quietly. "Nothing important. Buy milk. Don't forget the appointment. Silly things." She smiled, though it barely reached her eyes. When he was gone, I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. The room became still. The kettle clicked as it cooled. I kept pretending I'd find another one. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," was all I managed. "So was I," she replied, for a very long time. We sat there without trying to rescue the conversation. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. Inside, the tea slowly cooled. I wondered if she could hear the questions I wasn't asking. Did she ever stop feeling alone? Did she notice how often I looked for reasons to stay a little longer? The thoughts embarrassed me almost as quickly as they appeared. She wasn't just older than me. She was my friend's mother. Every time I imagined crossing that invisible line, I immediately pictured losing my closest friend. Some things aren't impossible. They're just expensive. "You've gone quiet," she said. I was thinking. I guessed. She smiled, and for a second the years between us didn't disappear, they simply stopped being the loudest thing in the room. She stood and reached for a chair that had begun to wobble. "I've been meaning to tighten this." "I can do it." She handed me a screwdriver. While I worked, she steadied the chair with one hand. Our fingers brushed as I passed the tool back. Neither of us pulled away quickly. Neither of us mentioned it. Instead, she laughed softly. "My son would have told me to buy a new chair. I guess I'm cheaper." "No," she said, looking at me for a moment longer than necessary. "I think you just notice things people usually walk past." I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, it felt like someone had quietly seen the parts of me I never knew how to explain. After that afternoon, I told myself I should stay away for a while. Not forever. Just enough for everything to feel ordinary again. A few days passed. Then a week. I answered my friend's messages. We met outside instead of at his house, grabbed coffee, watched a game, talked about work. Everything looked the same. Only I kept noticing what was missing. On Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my friend. "Mom asked if you were okay, said you hadn't been around." I stared at the message. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. "Just busy." That wasn't exactly a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. The next Saturday, I ended up there anyway. My friend had invited a few people over for lunch. The house felt louder than usual. Someone had music playing from the living room. Another friend was laughing over something I hadn't heard. She moved quietly through it all, carrying plates from the kitchen, smiling whenever someone thanked her. When she noticed me, her smile hesitated. Just for a second. "Hi. Hi. You've been busy." "Yeah." Another pause. I thought maybe. She stopped herself. "What?" She shook her head. "Nothing." Someone called her name from the dining room. She turned away before either of us could find better words. For the rest of the afternoon, we barely spoke. But I kept catching her looking in my direction. Not often. Just enough. Later, everyone drifted into the backyard. My friend disappeared with the others to help his neighbor move a heavy table across the fence. "I'll be back," he shouted. The gate closed behind them. The yard became strangely quiet. She was gathering empty glasses from the patio. Without thinking, I started helping. "You don't have to." I know. She handed me another glass anyway. Our hands avoided each other this time. Or maybe they tried to. I was worried, she said, stacking the glasses inside a tray. You didn't have to be. I know. But I was. Neither of us looked up. The wind pushed a few dry leaves across the patio. I kept wondering if I'd said something wrong. You didn't. Then why did you disappear? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because every answer sounded dangerous. Because every honest sentence seemed to begin somewhere I wasn't allowed to go. I just thought I stopped. She waited. I thought maybe it would be better. For who? I couldn't answer that. She sighed so quietly I almost missed it. You remind me of someone who leaves before anyone asks him to. I looked at her then. She wasn't accusing me. She sounded tired. Like she'd watched people disappear before. I'm trying not to make things harder. You think staying away makes them easier? I don't know. Neither did she. The back door slid open. My friend stepped inside, laughing with the others. There you two are. She immediately picked up the tray. I'll take these. I've got them. It's fine. She smiled. The polite smile. The one she'd give anyone. Something inside me sank. As the evening ended, I walked toward my car. She followed a few steps behind to lock the front gate. Drive safely, she said. The same words as always. I nodded. So I'll see you around. If you want to. I turned. She was closer than I expected. Close enough that I noticed the loose strand of hair the wind had pulled across her face. Without thinking, my hand lifted. Almost. Just enough to brush it back. I stopped. She didn't move either. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of us stepped away. Then the sound of my friend's voice drifted through the open window. Mom. She blinked. I lowered my hand. Good night, I said. Good night. I drove away with my heart still somewhere on that front porch, wondering how something that never happened could feel impossible to forget. After that evening, I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. That almost made it worse. Knowing something was changing didn't tell me what to do with it. A few days later, my friend asked if I could stop by while he finished a late shift at work. Mom's waiting for a delivery, he said. Just keep her company if you get there first. I almost said no. Instead, I found myself walking up the familiar path just before sunset. The package arrived within minutes. A small bookshelf. Too awkward for one person to carry. I'll help, I said. I was hoping you'd say that. We carried the pieces into the living room without saying much. The instructions sat untouched on the floor while we figured it out ourselves. You always do things the difficult way, she asked. I like pretending I know what I'm doing. She smiled. It almost works. For a while, all we talked about were crooked screws and backwards panels. It felt safe. Until it didn't. When the shelf was finally standing straight, we stepped back at the same time. Our shoulders brushed. Neither of us moved. Looks better, I said. It does. The silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable. Just full. She looked toward the window. My son mentioned you've been turning down invitations. I rubbed the back of my neck. I've been busy. I don't think that's it. No. She shook her head. I think you're avoiding this house. There it was. The sentence neither of us had wanted to say. I've been trying to do the right thing. For who? I don't know anymore. She nodded slowly, as if she'd already guessed the answer. I've been trying too. Those words landed somewhere deep inside me. She picked up a folded blanket from the couch and smoothed it across the armrest even though it didn't need fixing. Tiny movements. Keeping her hands busy. I keep telling myself you're just one of my son's friends. Her voice was calm. So why does it feel strange when you stop coming? I couldn't answer. Because I'd been asking myself the opposite question every night. Why did coming here feel more like going home than my own apartment? I don't like what this is doing to me, I admitted. The word surprised even me. She closed her eyes for a brief second. I know. I wait for messages I shouldn't be waiting for. I know. I hear someone mention your street and I stopped. The rest stayed somewhere behind my ribs. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not sadness. Not happiness. Recognition. I thought I was the only one fighting it, she whispered. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening. Someone walked a dog across the street. A sprinkler clicked back and forth, ordinary sounds carrying on as though nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. I've spent months reminding myself about the age between us, she said quietly, about my son, about what people would think. She laughed once without humor, as if repeating those things would make me stop noticing you. I looked down at my hands. I don't want to hurt anyone's. Neither do I. Another silence. Long enough to hear the old wall clock ticking. She took one slow step toward me. Not enough to erase the distance. Just enough that I could see the uncertainty in her eyes instead of hiding from my own. If we keep pretending, she began. Her voice faded. She searched my face as if the rest of the sentence might already be there. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. And hanging between us was the only question that mattered. What happens if neither of us steps back? I didn't go back the next week. Or the week after that. Every morning I told myself it was the right decision. Every evening I caught myself driving the longer route home, the one that happened to pass her street. I never slowed down. Not enough to matter. At least that's what I kept telling myself. My friend noticed before anyone else. You've disappeared again, he said over coffee. I've just had a lot going on. You always say that. I shrugged. He studied me for a moment, then changed the subject. I was grateful. And somehow disappointed. A few days later, my phone lit up. Not a message. A photo. My friend had sent a picture from his kitchen. Mom finally put that bookshelf where she wanted it. I stared at it longer than I should have. The bookshelf stood against the living room wall. On the top shelf sat the blue teapot we'd used that afternoon. Nothing else. Just an ordinary photo. Still, it felt strangely personal. I almost asked how she was. Instead, I pressed my phone face down on the table. Another week passed. Then unexpectedly I saw her. I had stopped at a neighborhood grocery store after work. She was at the end of the produce aisle, comparing two bunches of fresh herbs. For a second I thought she'd smile. Instead, she gave me a polite nod. The kind she'd offer a stranger. Hello. Hi. You've been well. Yeah. You. I'm fine. Fine. Such a small word. It somehow created more distance than silence ever had. She picked up her basket. It was nice seeing you. You too. And then she walked away. No hesitation. No looking back. I stood there holding a carton of milk I'd forgotten I needed. The conversation lasted less than a minute. It stayed with me for days. I finally understood why she'd pulled away when my friend mentioned it without realizing he was answering a question I'd never asked. My aunt's been staying with Mom. Oh. She worries Mom spends too much time alone. He laughed. She's already trying to introduce her to someone. I forced a smile. Really? Some guy from church, apparently he's nice. The rest of his sentence faded into the background. I nodded in the right places. Pretended to listen. Inside, everything had gone strangely quiet. Not because I believed she'd suddenly fallen for someone else. Because I realized she'd been trying to step back. Maybe for herself. Maybe for her son. Maybe for both of us. That evening I unlocked my apartment and noticed how still it felt. The same chair. The same dishes drying beside the sink. The same notebook resting on the coffee table. I opened my phone. Started typing. Can we talk? Deleted it. Tried again. I'm sorry for disappearing. Deleted that too. Then something simpler. I miss. I stopped before the sentence found its ending. Some feelings become heavier the moment you give them words. I locked my phone. Across the room, the silence settled back into place. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life had forgotten to finish the sentence. That night I drove past her street one last time. The hallway light I'd grown used to seeing was still on. I slowed for a moment. My hand drifted toward the turn signal, then fell back to the steering wheel. I kept driving. And somewhere behind me, a porch light stayed burning for someone who never knocked. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was my friend. Hey, you busy? Not really. Mom's washing machine finally gave up. I laughed. That's not funny. I know, sorry. I told her I'd help, but I'm stuck at work. Think you could stop by just until the repair guy gets there? There was a long pause before I answered. Yeah, I'd appreciate it. She looked surprised when she opened the door. I thought my son was coming. He couldn't make it. For a second, neither of us seemed to know what to do with the silence. Then she stepped aside. Come in. The house hadn't changed. The newspaper was still folded on the counter. The blue teapot rested beside the stove. Only something felt different. Maybe because we'd both spent weeks pretending distance would solve what honesty hadn't. The repair technician arrived, replaced a worn-out hose, explained everything twice, then left. The front door clicked shut. The house became quiet again. I made tea, she said. I noticed. It's getting cold. We've always been good at that. She looked at me. At what? Letting tea go cold. The corner of her mouth lifted. So we have. We carried our mugs to the back porch. The evening air was cool enough that neither of us spoke right away. Somewhere nearby, children were playing before dinner. A dog barked. Life continued without asking permission. I almost answered your message, she said. I frowned. I never sent one. I know. The words caught me off guard. I kept waiting anyway. I looked down at my cup. I wrote it. More than once. I nodded. She smiled with quiet understanding. I did the same. Neither of us laughed. There wasn't anything funny about how much effort two adults had spent avoiding a conversation. I've been thinking, I said. Dangerous habit. It is. Another small smile. The kind that disappeared almost as soon as it arrived. I can't keep pretending this isn't real. She took a slow breath. I was afraid you'd say that. You wanted me to stay away. I wanted to protect everyone. And now. She looked out into the yard before answering. I don't know if protecting people always means pretending. The words settled between us. Careful. Honest. I care about you, I said quietly. I know. No. I shook my head. I don't think you do. My voice wasn't louder. Just steadier. I wait for excuses to see you. I notice things I'd never notice about anyone else. I miss conversations that most people would probably forget. I swallowed. And every time I walk away, it feels like I'm leaving something unfinished. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they looked tired. But no longer guarded. I cared long before I admitted it to myself, she said softly. I hated that. Why? Because you're my son's friend. She let the sentence sit there. Because I'm older. Another pause. And because losing either of you would hurt more than keeping quiet. I understood. For the first time completely. There wasn't a villain. There wasn't an easy answer. Just two people standing at the edge of a choice. I don't want to hide, I said. I don't want to lie. She looked at me for a long time. Then she reached across the small space between us. Not dramatically. Just enough for her hand to rest lightly over mine. Warm. Steady. Real. We'll do this carefully, she whispered. I turned my hand over and gently held hers. Okay. She smiled. Not because everything was suddenly solved. Because at last, neither of us was carrying the truth alone. Nothing changed overnight. That was probably why it lasted. For a while we were simply careful. I came by when my friend was home. We talked the way we always had. We let ordinary afternoons be ordinary. There were no dramatic promises, no secret plans, no stolen moments that belonged in someone else's story. Just patience. Months have a way of smoothing the sharp edges off impossible things. Eventually, the truth found its own time. It wasn't perfect. My friend needed time to understand. There were difficult conversations, long silences, and more than one evening when I drove home wondering if we'd asked too much of the people we cared about. No one walked away. That surprised me the most. Life didn't become easier. It became more honest. On Saturday mornings, I'd stop by with black coffee from the little cafe a few blocks away. She would already have tea steeping in the blue teapot. "You still remember," she'd say every time she handed me my mug. As if I'd forget. Some habits deserve to stay. The old bookshelf still stood in the living room. The chair we repaired together still wobbled just enough to make us laugh whenever someone sat in it. She refused to replace it. It reminds me that fixing something isn't always about making it perfect. I stopped arguing. Every now and then we'd walk through the neighborhood after dinner. No destination. Just familiar streets and quiet conversations. There was a small wooden bench in the park where we'd usually sit for a few minutes before heading home. One morning we happened to glance at my watch. 8:47 a.m. She smiled. "You're looking at the time like it means something." "It does." "What?" I looked around the park. People walking dogs. Someone reading a newspaper. A little girl chasing pigeons across the path. Nothing extraordinary. I used to think ordinary days were the ones you forgot. And now, I think they're the ones you build a life from. She reached for my hand without thinking. The kind of gesture that no longer felt uncertain. Just familiar. Comfortable. Earned. Sometimes we'd still let the tea grow cold because we were talking. Sometimes I'd finish my black coffee before either of us noticed. Sometimes we'd simply sit together without saying anything at all. Funny how silence had stopped feeling lonely. It had become shared. One evening, while locking the front door, she looked at me and laughed softly. "You know." "What?" "I almost never leave the hallway light on anymore." I smiled. "You don't have to." She slipped her hand into mine. "No, I don't." We stood there for another moment before heading inside. The porch light went out behind us. Not because someone had forgotten it. Because after all this time, there was finally someone coming home. And every now and then, when one of us poured tea or the other reached for black coffee without asking, we'd catch each other's eye and smile at the memory of how close we came to letting fear decide our lives. Neither of us ever had to explain it. Some stories don't end with a grand declaration. Some end with two people quietly choosing each other again and again in the smallest moments that everyone else would probably miss. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow burn romances where the smallest moments leave the deepest marks.